Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. The Road to Autonomy is brought to you in part by Stantec Generation AV. Stantec Generation AV combines some of the most experienced AV experts in the industry with the resources of a global engineering firm. Stantec Generation AV provides education, consulting, assessment, and guidance to any industry interested in autonomous vehicles. Learn more at stantec.com. Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to have John Absmeier, Chief Technology Officer, Lear Corporation. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Thanks, Grayson.
Super happy to have you here. You have an incredible background. Our country owes you a debt of gratitude for your service in the military. So thank you so much for your service, and thank you for coming on the podcast today.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
John, as a Sergeant E5 United States Marine Corps focused on motor transport, what did you take away from your time in the service as it directly relates to the future mobility?
Well, aside from leadership skills, I would say that the biggest thing I took away was that the way that cars have been designed over the past 100 years are really as mechanical systems. But the shift that needs to happen that I've realized throughout the course of my career in the automotive industry is that there needs to be a paradigm shift from a mechanically designed vehicle to a software platform that leverages electrical, electronic components, and ultimately the mechanical system to drive us or move us around. So that was probably the biggest thing, is that there's a lot better ways of using future tech and modern technology to deploy mobility.
Was there something in your military experience that you saw with software that helped our men and women in the front lines? Was there something that just triggered that moment for you?
Actually, there's not a lot of software in the traditional vehicles that I worked on. I was a motor transport mechanic, so I worked on big, heavy-duty diesel engines and vehicles, including Humvees and so on. And intentionally, they were designed without a lot of software because you have to be able to, in the battlefield, repair and fix things with whatever tools you have available. And oftentimes you don't have diagnostic tools and computers and so on in the past. However, as things have become more modern, I'm sure seeing in many modern warfare vehicles much more software and connectivity and capabilities, especially with drones and things like that. But at that time, it was very much a mechanical system, and most everything was controlled quite simply.
You could simply put it this way, it's old-fashioned hard work.
Indeed. A lot of heavy lifting.
So you had this great military experience in the Marine Corps, and then in 2012, you set up the Delphi Labs and led the lab's development of autonomous vehicle platform. Could you talk about that experience, please? Because you're coming out of the Marines, going into the private sector, and building something new and different. Are you taking your leadership skills from the Marine Corps and applying it to the lab?
Yeah, most definitely. In fact, I would maybe clarify, I didn't directly step out of the military into industry. I actually did reserves for a few years, went to college, and then started my career actually at General Motors and Delphi at Delco Electronics in the mid-90s. And I'm fortunate because I had the chance to work on sort of all the technologies that are now coming to reality. I started working on the EV1, the electric vehicle, back in the mid-90s. I got highly interested in electrification, 25 years ago. Then I got to work on fuel cells. I then ran a startup company doing connectivity and data, and then went to China for 6 years and started an electric vehicle business for Delphi at the time, and then came back and started the lab. So I had been sort of working on everything from autonomous driving to connectivity to electrification for a little more than a decade before I came out back to California and started that. But throughout my career, I've taken my military experience in leadership, in discipline, in drive, as part of my operating style. Although I'm maybe a little bit of a different Marine, I'm not like a skull cracker. I like to work with people collaboratively. And so I take some of the way we lead in the military, lead by example. You don't necessarily command respect, you earn respect, et cetera. And so try to be a humble leader, but certainly taking into account my training.
You're a Renaissance man with leadership skills that understands geopolitics from your time in China. I'm sure that you got a really good understanding of supply chain economics then, but I'd love to know, the EV1's iconic and even had it made a movie out of it. What was it like working on that iconic vehicle?
It was awesome. I was a young engineer, so I worked on the inductive charge paddle connection system as part of what was called Energenics, which was long story, but shortly, General Motors acquired Hughes, and Hughes Electronics had an automotive group called Delco Electronics, and that's where I worked. Delco Electronics did a lot of the system integration, motor control, battery pack design, battery management systems, along with many other partners for General Motors as a captive supplier in that EV1 development. So really, I was just cutting my teeth. I was learning how to be an engineer, figuring out what I wanted to do. And, that sort of, I would say, led into what I focused my whole career on. But it was awesome. I learned a ton on that. And again, it really sparked my interest in electrification up until this day.
And electrification is a trend that we're only seeing expanding across the globe. And I want to stay on the learning topic here for a minute, because in 2015, Delphi Labs completed a coast-to-coast trip from San Francisco to New York City in an autonomous vehicle. What did you learn, and what did the team learn during that trip? Because that's a pretty monumental, historic trip that was done.
Yeah, we started that initiative in 2011 timeframe, and it was interesting because we did it in Mountain View right alongside a couple of other big notable companies that are doing autonomous driving. And I would say what I learned in that time was this was a huge task. It's not something that was going to be solved overnight or even in a couple years. And frankly speaking, a lot of the challenges that existed 10 years ago still exist today. Certainly, regulatory and insurance liability, that's still an issue that's not fully been addressed or solved for sure. But even technical challenges, sensors, when are they ready? When are they good enough? When are they high enough resolution and have low enough latency that you can make a decision in milliseconds, which you'll need to do full, every case autonomy. Computing, we still are not efficient enough. There's too much entropy where these things are not ready for mass deployment in a mobile device to do the level of compute we need. Even mapping and scalability of mapping, there's still big challenges there. Not to mention the functional safety in all the corner cases that could exist. So to be honest with you, those same things exist now that existed then. And so I'd say the biggest thing I learned is the complexity of this type of a challenge. Although it is the dream, sometimes I'll joke that maybe we should just skip to teleportation. It might be easier. It is something that I think is going to come. It just takes time and investment.
It takes time and investment, but it has to be done right. And the industry as a whole, they're not cutting corners. They're doing things right. They're hiring some of the smartest individuals in the world to solve this problem. Today, you're CTO of Lear Corporation, an incredible company, and you're in this leadership position. I'd love to know, so you've got this great background of solving complex problems. You've got this clear understanding of leadership, a clear understanding of the industry. What attracted you when Lear called and said, "Hi, John, we'd love to have you be our CTO"?
Yeah, at the time I was actually at Samsung, and we'd completed the Harman acquisition, 18 months before. And I was having fun. It was sort of a little bit of a departure from working in traditional tier one automotive land to a big tech company. And I got to see that juxtaposition and happening, how the visioning and mindset works, and the way investment profiles and risk tolerance are different in tech versus traditional automotive. And at the time when I was approached by Ray Scott, our CEO at Lear, he was just stepping into the role. He said, John, we've never had a CTO before, and Lear is a phenomenal operator. The operational excellence at Lear is absolutely known for being able to manufacture and deliver. However, as the trends are now becoming, real driving forces with our customers, Ray said we need to start to really focus on innovation and technology as a priority in our mission here. And we need somebody who has experience and wants to drive that. And coming from sort of both backgrounds of tech and auto, I thought, this is a greenfield opportunity. This is a chance to work with one of the greatest 100-plus-year-old automotive suppliers in the industry. And it's a chance to really try to move the needle with open innovation and technology. So I joined really to work with Ray and drive that mission together. It's
an awesome mission, and Lear's a great company, but more importantly, I geek out on this and our listeners know and my friends know, is Lear's a publicly traded company. So here you are, you're stepping in as CTO of a publicly traded company. You have investors, you have shareholders, and I'd love to know, as a CTO of a publicly traded company, how are you keeping Lear 2 and 3 steps ahead of your competition as it comes to the emerging field of autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, so autonomous vehicles for Lear are a bit of a different thing because we're not directly competing in the full stack development, but all of our products are affected by the change that happens, right? If you look on our seating business, if you think about shared mobility, individually owned autonomous vehicles, or delivery applications, we are evolving our product to suit those use cases. So We have things like Configure Plus, which is for customization and configurability of a cabin, whether it's moving occupant seats in different orientations or bringing in delivery containers and optimization systems. On the flip side, with seats specifically, we have what we call Into, which is our seat as a smart device product line, where we're bringing sensors for safety, health and wellness, comfort, and even connectivity directly in the seat. So as you go towards more shared mobility or multi-party use, you can customize and provide the services that a consumer is expecting. I joke that it's the new SaaS business model. So the new seat as a service business model, because seats now, aren't necessarily going to be a one-time sale thing. It's something that you could, if you get out of a plane in Japan and you're going to a hotel, you might pay $2 extra to get a massage on the way and things like that. On our e-system side or our electronic side of the house, we have products in wiring harnesses and terminals and connectors. As you go towards autonomy, you have redundancy that's required. You also have new architectures with high-speed data networks and different power backbones and infrastructure, different compute requirements. And so that all affects our electronics and our software and our electrical systems business as well. So long story short, with autonomy, we see it as a big opportunity, and the way that I try to stay ahead of it is something a good friend of mine said, Ricky Hootie, who was the former CTO at Audi: network wins. I think it's really having a good network. And actually, Grayson, that's how you and I met, through friends, mutual friends, I think Riley. And keeping that network alive and also being passionate about the space, I think, is really how you stay ahead. So watching what's going on, talking to people, working with different startups and entrepreneurs and technologists is how you have to do it.
No, you're right. I'm going to give Riley a shout out, Brian, a shout out from Trucks VCs for setting this up. So Riley, thanks. I know you're a listener, so thanks for setting this up. I love to know, John, seats are cool, and you're seeing a lot of evolution in seats in the high-end bespoke world, but you're also seeing seats evolve in gaming, where these gaming seats, are you taking inspiration or anything away from the gaming world as you're looking to put those seats in the vehicle, as you introduce seats as a service, where perhaps, don't laugh, you got a rumble seat, or the seat becomes part of an experience? If you're watching augmented reality experience or VR, it becomes part of that immersive experience?
Yeah, so I would say that is something we have in advanced concept phase. As far as gaming goes, it also affects our Xevo business, which I think you and I will talk about a little bit later. But as you start to unburden the driver from some of the driving tasks, there are certain things you could consider, but they're still a bit out there. However, I would say that the user experience is now the main differentiator in cars, right? So certainly horsepower and aesthetics are still important to people, but not nearly as important as the experience. And I split the experience into both the mechanical or physical experience as well as the digital experience. And the way we think about seats is that they are the cradle of that experience. And it's the place where you have the most physical contact when you're in a car. And as long as people, have behinds, we're going to have seats, right? So they're not going anywhere, and we just have to evolve with what's happening in the industry to enable a delightful user experience. And that's the biggest differentiator for car makers going forward, is how do you create that delightful user experience?
You hit the nail on the head, because the user experience is the future of the automotive business, is the future of mobility. You have 5 different Acme vehicles lined up. The consumers, well, I like to go have this experience, or I like to have this experience. And that's really what's going to drive that change. And I want to dive in here into Xevo. Is that why in 2019, Lear acquired Xevo to enable this commerce platform? So Mary chooses experience A, Bobby chooses experience B, and then Xevo kind of becomes that glue that allows that commerce transaction to happen?
Yeah, and it's not just commerce. So the thesis is around connectivity and data and finding value from data. Certainly with seating and seating as a service, we think about new business models and new technology that can go in that we could potentially monetize differently. But you also have to create an interface to that, and you have to know who the consumer is by connecting through cloud and mobile. And so Xevo brings that together for us. But also on the electronic side, if you think about the amount of data that's starting to flow through the car and the architectural shifts that are happening, we can think about edge computing becoming a reality in the vehicle, where you have headless apps, or where you have the ability to look at data and information at the edge to decide what experience to deliver, to decide what service you might need to offer a consumer, to decide if there's a potential recall or warranty liability that you want to get ahead of, or to help consumers manage their vehicle maintenance and service, et cetera. It all ties together with what Lear is bringing to bear on both the electronic side and the seating side.
I'm going to go down old school car route. To me, one of the best features in connected cars today is the unlock and lock from a phone. Is that something that Xevo enables or powers?
We can. We don't today do unlock lock. Lear has a lot of body electronics business, and so we have done some work on remote keyless entry and phone as key for sure. It's not what Xevo enables. Xevo is really more a cloud-based future digital user experience technology. And so it's commerce as one piece, as you noted, but it's also a way to interface with the consumer, bring in services, bring in applications, bring in content, including media, even including gaming, etc. And the idea behind Xevo is that we're white labeled, so we allow the OEM to maintain their brand identity and to design the user experience in the image that they want. Many OEMs have different, like they might have sports cars as well as off-road vehicles. They want to be able to bring a different experience and maybe even different apps and services to a consumer in those different types of vehicles, or an electric vehicle versus an IC engine vehicle. And Xevo enables them to do that with a modern cloud-based infrastructure, as opposed to having to change the software in the car every time you want to make an adjustment.
You're giving your customers the ability to enhance services and the ability to create experiences as the world changes. Is that a fair statement?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right.
So let's fast forward, and all the big OEMs are publicly working on autonomous vehicles, and or they have a partnership to develop autonomous vehicles. What experiences do you see being enabled in autonomous vehicles?
Good question. I think in the near term, productivity, certainly, and Xevo is doing this today for some customers. I can tell you from personal experience that when I'm driving in a car, if I have a meeting on the calendar, I live in California, so in some cases I can't make it on time to the meeting, or something, an accident happens, traffic backs up. While driving, trying to get into the calendar, find and click on a link to a meeting, that's so tedious. And maybe if we were autonomous, it wouldn't be so tedious, but when you're actually driving, it's very hard. So some of the enablement of productivity that is needed today, even with partial levels of autonomy, are just going to get better. So for example, I'm driving to a meeting, but the traffic and navigation system says you're not making it on time. Hey, John, your meeting's going to start in 10 minutes. Do you just want to click into that meeting from the car remotely? Great. Yep, let's do that. And so surfacing opportunities to use services and productivity in the car, I think, is going to be critical for autonomy as well. I would argue that today we're still a feature phone in the car, like the pre-2007. We talked about this before, like texting in a feature phone, you had to press like 113336, whatever to make a text. And I would argue that the car is a bit like that now. You have multiple menus, you have layers and layers of different functions and features that you have to go dig through and find. Most people don't even know what their car can do, unless they're an expert or unless they've managed to search something out. Even the salesperson at the dealer often doesn't know what your car does. So part of what Xevo is doing is understanding what's happening, what you're doing, who you are, and trying to surface those opportunities for use. And I think that becomes even more relevant when you're in an autonomous car that's shared. You have even less of an idea of how to use things.
That's a really great point. And I've been stuck many times trying to go from San Jose to Mountain View or Palo Alto, and that traffic backs up and you're like, oh, I'm going to be 45 minutes late because there was an accident or whatever happens. I like that idea to be able to dial into the meeting on the way there. And as we're starting to see AAA data, we're seeing all sorts of data from the National Governors Highway Association about vehicle miles driven and coming into a post-pandemic. Is that dial into a meeting feature currently available today, or is that something that will be rolled out as more individuals start to drive again?
It's coming. It's in production development. It's not yet deployed. It's coming with a few different OEM customers. You asked also, I don't want to miss the point you asked about other things besides productivity. Certainly, there's opportunities for things like gaming and sleeping and watching movies coming into the car with higher levels of autonomy as well. And we're trying to address that with Xevo also. So bringing in media streaming with video content or bringing in gaming, et cetera. Those things will happen. It's just a little further out in terms of consumers being able to use it. But they're deploying in rear seat or passenger applications now.
When do we get to the point looking to the future where I have this theory that the glass is going to become augmented and it's going to unlock commerce, it's going to unlock immersive experiences, it's going to have some Hollywood director will make an app or a movie when you're going down the 101 that things come to life. Do you think that happens? And what do you think those experiences are going to look like in the future when we get to full autonomy?
Yeah, it's an awesome question. It's one that I'm close to. I actually, if you go back and look at CES 2014, I just searched this video the other day because I was thinking about it. We actually made a Tesla Model S into an automated vehicle, but we didn't. It was in a stationary demo at CES 2014. And we did. We used electrochromatic surfaces on the interior of the windows that you could see through when you were driving or when you needed to. And then you flip a switch and they turn opaque, and we projected content and interaction onto the windows of the vehicle. And at the time, I can tell you, I won't say names, but many people were like, this is crazy. No way this is going to happen. Never happening. And I will say, though, that, with some of the display companies coming now with screens that are able to actually be transparent and have images on them, it seems more and more likely. But there's a lot of challenges with that. I hope we get to that point. But that point, the safety criticality of glass windshields and windows on a car make it very tough. The cost makes it very tough. The safety elements of it, like when can you use it and when can't use it, make it very difficult. But the dream is real, right? Like, that's all the sci-fi movies we all loved as youngsters and even still now that make that dream very cool and enticing, but it's very hard to do in the automotive industry. If we get to a point with autonomy where we can eliminate things like seat belts and airbags, then I think that becomes a real option, because then you can think about the car being used as much more than just a car, and the value proposition is there. That's the big problem with autonomy so far, is that everyone thinks it's like this huge gold mine, that it's going to, just because we can have a car not drive, we don't have to drive ourselves around anymore, that all of a sudden that unlocks like trillions of dollars of market. But I don't think so. And I also think that some of the use cases to get an ROI on autonomous aren't quite fully baked yet. But once we get to that end dream, then yes, I sure hope we can do that on a window in the vehicle.
You bring up the valid point. It's just, I don't know. I was talking to somebody about leprechauns the other day, and he used the analogy, well, it's a pot of gold. Robotaxi model, the way it's developed, is not a pot of gold. You have to have the experience. And I think it was 2 years ago at CES, Warner Brothers teamed up with Intel, and they did the DC Comics, which was really good. It was in a BMW X5. It was stationary park, but you had this immersive experience. They were talking about creating a ride with it. I think the holy grail of who's going to hit the nail on the head, I think it's going to be Disney. And you're going to see some really interesting news around Disney World and the new Star Wars hotels open, where Disney's might have a human driver in the front, and they make the back of the vehicle, it's all blacked out like you're inside of Star Wars. And that's going to be the first real test, because it's all safe. You have a driver there, but Disney Imagineering, which are some of the most incredible imaginative people in the world, designed the Star Wars experience. So when you land at MCO, and these travel agents have the best line for it, and they said, do you know what MCO stands for? I said, no, what? Mickey's corporate office. I said, oh. They're like, yes, it's the Bank of Mickey Mouse, because everybody's coming there and writing a check to Bob Iger and now Bob Chapek. And you get in there and you have this experience. And so when you land at the Star Wars hotel, the vehicle drives there, you're in the Star Wars. And Disney has the ability to sell you a Star Wars doll or sell you fast access pass, and becomes this whole commerce platform. And so I see a lot of similarities with Disney's doing for the future, for what you're doing today by allowing your customers, the Xevo platform, to enable commerce. I'd love to know, how many vehicles globally are currently running the Xevo platform?
We're on over 50 million vehicles, and not all of those are the commerce platform. That's the infotainment and services platform as well as commerce. But we've announced the commerce platform with General Motors and with Stellantis. Also, we've announced and are deploying with Hyundai now and with Nissan as well. We have other customers that we haven't publicly disclosed yet, but they're coming. The interesting thing about the commerce platform, mostly North America today, but we're now this year going into Western Europe and other places, Southeast Asia, et cetera. Today, we're represented at over 400,000 retail outlets in North America. And so that's across, we say there's things that you always do in your car, and then there's the things that you might or convenience will do in your car. The things that you always do in your car, like parking, like service your vehicle, like bringing in fuel or charging for electric vehicles, and tolling. Those are the 5 things that you always do if you're in a car at some point. And so we try to make those the first focus of the commerce platform, because people have to do them. And if you make it easy from the car and intuitive, then it will inspire delight, right, by the consumer. On the flip side, convenience things like quick service food or food in general, groceries, coffee and beverage, content, media and streaming services, et cetera. Those are all the additional commerce opportunities that we bring to bear through the platform. But today, yeah, millions and millions of vehicles.
Are all those vehicles have access to the Xevo marketplace, where if they wanted to put the Starbucks app or the Find Your Charging app, all those vehicles have access to the marketplace?
Not all 50 million have them. A portion of them have them. We haven't, I don't think, disclosed that, so I can't say exactly the number. But all of the new deployments that I just mentioned, GM, Stellantis, Hyundai, Nissan, et cetera, those are coming with the commerce platform. The usage of it today, meaning which apps you get access to, is curated by the car makers themselves. That's just the way it is today. I think over time, what we're seeing the shift happening is that consumers will have much more of a voice in what they want to use and see. And even onboarding will be connected with your phone and the services and the payment methods that you use in your phone so that we can bring that to the surface in the car, enable consumers to use it. And again, knowing what you do, what you like, where you go, as well as what might be relevant in that moment, we can bring those opportunities to the surface, either on top of the map or as a reminder on the display.
You're right about the marketplace changing. We just have to look at the cell phone industry pre-iPhone, where everything would come preloaded. Then Apple rolled in, and you were able to put any app you want on there, like biddity boppity boop, and away you go. I want to give you credit here because the Xevo's running one heck of a strategy where all of your OEM customers own all the data generated through driver interactions and extended customer relationships throughout the vehicle. A very smart strategy, very savvy strategy. I'd love to know, why was that strategy chosen?
Yeah, it's a great question. So that, along with white labeling of the platform, was really to give an alternative, right? I won't throw anybody under the bus, but some of the big tech companies are taking the data and also generating value for themselves from the data, and even charging for an OEM to use that platform or the consumer to use that platform in the car. Our angle was, number one, not all consumers want that. Number two, not all OEMs want that. And number three, there's a way to create shared value here that we could capture some of, and we can help our OEM customers understand how to do. So a lot of the work that we've done is based on years of experience from the founders of Xevo and the team that makes up the leadership team, coming from, Microsoft and Amazon and so on, to learn from what's been done in the computer and web browser and mobile spaces and try to inform that in the automotive space. So the idea was that, there's room for more than just the big giants to take it all, and we can help our OEMs see some of the value from that also.
And shared value equals long-term growth and profits for your shareholders.
Indeed. Yes, indeed. And I think also it's important to note the regional element of it, because certain platforms aren't allowed in certain regions. And as we know, car makers are very global, right? And they need the ability to bring services to China, to Europe, to North America. And if they can deploy a platform on a global scale, it's obviously a lot more cost effective for them and easier to manage than having so much fragmentation, if you will. And I guess also the other important thing is being an expert in the auto architecture, electronics, and control enables Xevo to bring in the ability to use other features and functions in the car, where some of the other platforms are more just focused on navigation, voice, and ecosystem applications.
Voice in the car is awesome. You just hit the button. It's game-changing. What type of growth is Xevo seeing in in-vehicle voice assistance?
Yeah, we've designed the platform to be multimodal and agnostic to voice. We think everything from touch to gesture to voice have their place, for sure. Even hard buttons and knobs have their place, including like disintermediation of a decision, right? It's easier to just say yes or no once you ask a question that context can be weaved out of. We have so much context in the car, actually, in terms of interacting with a digital interface. You have more context in the car than probably anywhere else. You just think about the number of sensors in a car. We know how many people are in the car. We know if it's raining outside. We know where you're going. We know where you are. We know how much gas or energy level in charging you have in the car. So the ability to provide a better experience with that context is a lot more rich, right? So enabling OEMs to do that is hugely important. But voice, just to get back to that point, is critical, because with distraction and with, let's say, hard to find things, voice becomes a critical element. While we remain agnostic to voice, we integrate different voice vendors. We did announce a partnership with Cerence recently, where we're integrating our commerce platform and our Xevo Glass platform with the Cerence voice engine, so that we can deploy it, on platforms that we're on together today and future opportunities with car makers.
Do you have any data that points to the customers who are actively using the voice, or am I an outliner individual that loves to use the voice?
You're probably a bit of an outlier. I think a lot of people probably use their phone voice more in the car than the embedded voice. And part of the problem is, if you look back at the history of voice in the car, it was grammar-based. and it was embedded in the vehicle. And so every utterance or everything you have to say was like a canned phrase that you had to learn, right? So like, I don't know, whatever, like turn on seat heater or I don't know, whatever it is. As opposed to saying, I'm cold, can you turn on the seat heater? You can't, the natural language recognition wasn't there, but it is coming now. And so we've gone from like embedded grammar based to like hybrid models where parts are embedded. So if you lose connectivity, you still have something, but parts are in the cloud and you can use more heavy computing and deliver a natural language experience. But even that still is not great. Ultimately using a modern natural language based AI for voice assistance is the direction. And I think we're just starting to see that really come into real life in the car.
And when it gets there, and I'm using a third-party one that's integrated into my car, so it's not your traditional off-the-shelf one, because the off-the-shelf one, you're right, you have to say this or say that, and you have to say it 4 or 5 times to get it to be nice to you. And then you're just so frustrated, you hit the button. You look at integrating things into the car. One hot topic now is integrating payments into the vehicle, and Xevo has a universal wallet solution. I'd love to know about that, please.
If you look at the way things are implemented today, and this is true of some of our deployments now, the card that you use, the card on file, is tied directly with the merchant that you're dealing with. So every gas vendor has a different account for every consumer, and they're not aggregated anywhere. Our approach has been to partner with those payment providers and the credit card aggregators, that keep the vault and all that good stuff with PCI and the compliance with the credit card industry safety rules. We've decided not to do that. We partnered with folks that do that for a living, and we bring the experience from the car through their platforms and services to deliver that. But what we've noticed is that, with every different merchant and service having a separate account and a separate card on file for an individual, it's tedious to use. Like you've got to enter it every time you want to use a different one. So the wallet concept is that we can aggregate your payment solution across all of those vendors, regardless of your account with each individual vendor. And that could not just include, buying fuel and food and things like that. It could also include content from the OEM or services from the OEM. And so the idea is that you have a one-stop payment in your vehicle for you, or your wife or other users of the car can have theirs. And it can be tied with, there's 3 legs to the stool that have to exist. One is certainly what's in the car. 2 is the cloud connectivity. And 3 is the mobile device, because everybody's tied to mobile, right? So how can we tie the 3 things together so that it's easy to onboard, it's easy to enter and maintain your accounts and credit cards and whatnot, and then it's easy to use when you're in the car. All those 3 things are what it facilitates.
How are consumers currently using the wallet service today?
It's in production development for deployment. Today, all of the deployments are, like I mentioned, in initial phase where you have accounts with individual vendors. But we're now in production development to deploy, in the next 6 to 12 months, I think.
And then what happens to the wallet when the vehicle becomes autonomous and shared? Does it travel with you and your phone unlocks it, perhaps?
Yeah, I think so. It's still a little bit far out to say, but certainly I think what you carry on your device goes with you everywhere. So how do you enable the experience that's relevant in the car or in the autonomous vehicle with the services and applications and payment methods that you use on your phone is critical. So, for example, we embed in usually the car makers' mobile apps, the third party companion apps that they put out for the car. But in the future, it could also reside in the application of the service provider that you're hailing a vehicle from. And then, you'd connect through that John Absmeier has gotten into X vehicle and I want all my content on screen number 2 or whatever it is. And it's authenticated by you with multi-factor. So using your phone, using your presence, and using your account in the cloud.
You're eliminating friction. You're creating a secure transaction environment, which benefits the driver at the end of the day. So you're doing good on all accounts. And John, we've covered a ton of ground about Lear, a ton of ground about Xevo, which I think is absolutely awesome. And I can't wait to see what the future holds for Xevo. So I want to take a step back here. You've got this one heck of a run in the automotive and mobility industry. You've got M&A experience. We're starting to see a lot of M&A chatter, a lot of press releases coming out. What are your thoughts on the current state of the industry around M&A and consolidation? Is this a trend that you see accelerating, or what are your thoughts on that?
We briefly touched on it earlier in the sense that there's very few companies in the world that have the balance sheet to create an entire autonomy stack. And I estimate that it's somewhere in the 50 to $100 billion range to create a full autonomous stack solution. And so the amount of capital required to do that is difficult, and the time that it takes, the runway to get there, is also pretty long. We've been saying for the past 2 decades that it's going to come in a decade. And I think even now, still, some people are saying it's going to be at 10 years from now. It's like that 10 years just keeps shifting. A lot of people have said that besides me, but it's true. You look back, it's been said forever. However, we're starting to see now, level 4 and things that are a little bit more constrained, and certain use cases like delivery, for example, where you have fixed routes. Those are now all coming. But the fact remains that this is a $50 to $100 billion challenge. And so to me, consolidation is inevitable. We're starting to see some of that happen, and I think we'll see more of it. There'll be, talent consolidation, there'll be technology consolidation, and I think there'll even be service and market consolidation. The thing that's still interesting to watch for me is that we're just now starting to see some of the end use cases, like we talked about before, that actually have an ROI that makes sense. And if you look at where the pot of gold is, it might not just be in shared autonomous vehicles. It might not, and probably not, as in individually owned autonomous vehicles. It could be in many other things, like certainly delivery, especially as we've gone to this like contactless world of everyone ordering things online and having them delivered. So I think consolidation is inevitable. And I think it's the beginning of what I've anticipated happening for a while. With COVID in particular, I think it started to really force companies and investors to prioritize where to place their bets and what they're good at and where they can create value long term. And so it's not quite as much the wild, wild west as it was 3 to 5 years ago. I think it's becoming a little bit more realistic.
No, you're right. Companies are growing up. They're getting, if you want to use the Larry Page and Sergey Brin thing, adult supervision here. Consolidation is healthy for our industry. So we're going through consolidation. Then when do you see commercialization actually moving the needle, where it's going to, instead of generating $100,000 a month or $10,000 a month, it's generating $1 million a month, $2 million a month, like meaningful revenue that people can say, okay, there's a business here that can scale?
I think we'll start to see the use cases sort of in the near term, because if you think about delivery as an example, if you can constrain things to fixed routes, if you can constrain things to not having a human driver in them, if you can take out some of the human driver elements of that type of an application, I think we'll start to see benefit from it soon. Similar with long haul truck, they're often limited by the hours a driver can drive. So how can you offload some of that for certain parts of the journey? So those types of applications, I'd say, are, to me, on the horizon for sure. It's more the end goal of having a fully autonomous fleet of people shuttles, either individually owned or even shared. That part is still, I think, a bit further out, and especially for every use case and every corner case, because it's not hard to do it in like a constrained city where you can have a specific road or a specific lane or an area where there's no bikes and pedestrians, those kinds of things. But to do it in the wild, that's still quite a ways away.
It's funny you bring up trucking, because for trucking, it was like, oh, they're the minor league team. They're not even playing AAA baseball. They're playing AA and single A baseball. Now, all suddenly, the trucking side of autonomy, they're the New York Yankees. They're the Los Angeles Dodgers. They're everybody's chasing because they think that they're going to win the World Series. And so I became fascinated with trucking about 2 years ago. I started digging into the economics of autonomous trucking. Made a lot of sense. Now it makes even more sense. The Port of LA, on normal, pre-COVID, takes 2 days to unload a container ship and put it onto trucks. Now it's 6 days due to a lack of trucks. Autonomous trucking can shore up the supply chain. They can do wonderful things. And then here's the big prediction that I've been harping on for a while now. I think one of the large autonomous trucking companies gets bought by a railroad. It's a lot cheaper to fund autonomous development than it is to build a railroad, go through all the permitting and the environmental stuff and pay the lawyers, where you can connect the railroad. Autonomous trucking and railroad is a match made in heaven, which makes a lot of money for shareholders.
Yeah, interesting. I like that idea. I think also electrification, right? Although I think they're mutually exclusive, but you nailed it with the trains, and the energy efficiency and the environmental concerns also has become absolutely top of mind for everybody, right? So I think if you couple the things together, you start to really recognize the benefit, not just financially, but also just from a human on a planet perspective, which I think has become top of mind for everyone now, including investors. That's now a value creator as opposed to a cost center as it used to be.
Yeah, as we've seen during COVID, a lot's changed permanently, a lot's changed temporarily, and markets go up, markets go down, opinions change, trends change. But there's one thing that we can both agree on: autonomy is not going anywhere. Autonomy is only going to continue to accelerate. Companies such as Lear are going to continue to create wonderful seats. You're going to continue here to come up with these ideas to build in-vehicle experiences and to continue to lead with your leadership. And John, as we look to wrap up this extremely insightful conversation, I'd love to know, what would you like our listeners to take away with them?
Well, I think, similar to where we started in the conversation, Grayson, like the idea that mobility is only going to get a lot better, and the idea that we don't have to settle for yesterday's leftovers. I think that there's opportunity, and especially as consumers start to demand the digital experience being the main thing that differentiates cars, there's a ton of opportunity. So I'm excited that it's everything that I feel like we've been working on for multiple decades, in my case 25 years, is now coming to fruition. And now I'm just starting to look forward to quantum computing and teleportation. But certainly autonomy, connectivity, and electrification are right on the horizon.
We'll get there, John. There's no doubt as these scientists continue to build really cool things and people like us figure out how to commercialize it. As we've heard here on today's podcast, the future is bright, the future is autonomous, the future is experiences and in-vehicle commerce. John, thank you so much for coming on the Road to Autonomy today.
Thank you, sir. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter at Road to Autonomy or email podcast@brulteco.com. The Road to Autonomy is produced by Brulte & Company. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Brulte & Company. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, tax, investment, or business advice.